Given recent events in the world of international sports, I want to talk for just a minute about hockey, and that should really make this a short sermon, but it won't be, because hockey is something about which I know almost nothing at all. I'm sorry. I took ice skating lessons as a child. They didn't take. I cannot skate. I have weak ankles. I have no idea what icing is if it's not on a cupcake. I'm not much of a sports person, really, but there are two games I really have a lot of trouble following, basketball and hockey, and both for the same reason. The little object that is being moved around the playing field is just moving too fast for me to follow. I like sports like bobsledding, where there's just one thing to keep an eye on. It's following a predictable path, and it's big enough to follow. Or rugby, where they all just get into a pile, and the object they're moving just moves a matter of inches at a time, instead of skittering across the ice, which brings me back to hockey. There is a long history of a fairly friendly rivalry between Canada and the US when it comes to hockey. Fairly friendly. And historically speaking, the US has not done terribly well against Canada. For instance, over the course of 19 games played between the two sides at various Winter Olympics, the United States has only won 4 games. And anyhow, a couple weeks ago, Canada won again. But sometimes in international relations, sports can become a proxy for deeper issues in geopolitics. And both hockey and geopolitics have brought us to an interesting point in Canadian history. Canadians appear to be more proud of being Canadian than perhaps at any time since the Battle of Vimy Ridge. And the Battle of Vimy Ridge was fought during the First World War in 1917, and it's Canada's most celebrated military victory. See, I know more about Canadian history than I do about hockey. But it's an often sort of mythologized symbol of the birth of Canadian national pride and self-awareness. And currently, in the face of insults and threats from its southern neighbor, my apologies, Canada is seeing a resurgence of national pride from coast to coast to coast. And as you know, I always say I get my best theology from t-shirts, bumper stickers, and Facebook memes. And the meme that illustrates this best at the moment is the one that says, "Do you know how badly you have to mess up your foreign policy to turn the Québécois into proud Canadians?" Am I right? So, pride is an interesting thing. When I was a kid, my father was into genealogy, and when I say into, I mean absolutely obsessed with it. And he was convinced that he had our family tree traced back to Adam and Eve. For the record, he did not. And he was always reminding me about illustrious and occasionally infamous ancestors, and lecturing me about having pride in the Dudley family. He was not best pleased when I reminded him that pride is traditionally regarded as one of the 7 deadly sins. And also I argued, why should I be proud of being a Dudley based on what people who've been dead for 400 years have done? Better, I should do something myself that might be worthy of pride. So my father and I had that little argument 50, 60 years ago, and I still maintain I was right. And in fact, he did eventually grudgingly admit that I had a point. But I did learn from my father the importance of history. And I learned how important it is to pay attention to the present. It's not a bad thing, necessarily, to look back on one's ancestors with pride when they have done something to be proud of. The same way, it's not a bad thing at all to be proud of one's country when it's done something to be proud of. Sometimes pride can't be justified. And this is, I think, one of the many, many reasons why it's so important to know our own history as individuals and as a community and as a country, to know all of our history, the good and the bad, and not try to suppress or avoid knowledge of the more challenging or even excruciatingly painful parts of our past, to know when to be proud of my country and when to be ashamed. We cannot forget our history, all of it. You know, Canada is, after all, a colonial state existing on stolen land. But we need to remember our history, not because we're destined to repeat it, God forbid, sometimes once was more than enough, but because we desire a better way. We can do better than the past. We want a better way. We want a better world. And the reading that Timothy read to us from the letter to the Hebrews is a passage from which the motto for the Order of Canada is taken. The motto for an award given to people who have performed extraordinary acts of service to Canada is, they desire a better country. They worked to make Canada a better country. And I will just say, 2 members of our congregation, that I know of at least, have received the Order of Canada, Reverend Dr. Brent Hawks, and more recently Douglas Elliott for his service to LGBTQ+ human rights. So they worked to make Canada a better country, a country of which we can hopefully be justifiably proud. And that is, I think, a great motto for people who've worked to make Canada better. And here we are today, gathered as people of faith who long for a better world, a world where love triumphs over hate, where justice prevails over oppression, and where every person, regardless of who they are or where they come from, regardless of whether they're rich or poor, regardless of how or who we worship, regardless of gender identity or sexual orientation, every person is seen and valued and embraced as beloved by God. Now, the author of Hebrews speaks of those in the past who desired a better country, one rooted in faith and justice and divine promise, and their journey echoes our own, as we too seek a world of dignity and equality and inclusion. A better country requires us to look forward as well as back. And one of the curses of history is that we can't go back and change the course leading to disasters, no matter how much we might wish to. The past has its own terrible inevitability, but it is never too late to change the future. It is never too late to change the future, and history can be a helpful guide. It's never too late to build a better world. I recall the Tommy Douglas quote that Jack Layton included in every email he sent. It said, "Courage, my friends, 'tis never too late to build a better world." Never too late to build a better world. And we desire not just a better country, but a better world. And in that, I think we are, all of us, united. We all desire a better world. I think everyone desires a better country, a better world. And I think that's true, certainly, of the First Nations of Turtle Island, who maintained this country and made it what it is today. It's true of those of us whose people have come to this land perhaps decades or hundreds of years ago. It's certainly true of our newest newcomers, our global neighbors. We all desire a better country, a better world, and I believe there is a deep, deep longing among all people on the face of the earth for a world that's shaped by faith and justice and love. We are all looking for a better world. So where on earth, literally, where on earth are we going to find one? Well, by the grace of God and with God's help, we're going to build it, starting right here. Actually, we're going to build it really starting right here. And here at the Metropolitan Community Church of Toronto, we proclaim that our mission is to build bridges with a vibrant spirituality that transforms lives and transforms the world, because that's how we transform the world, one life at a time. And our vision is to be a growing, inclusive, spiritual community that creates a just, kind, and loving world for all. And that is a really, really tall order. That is a really big dream. But we've set those goals before ourselves because as a community of faith, we have cultivated a vision of something greater than ourselves, a world that aligns with God's dream, God's dominion, where peace and justice reign. And the passage that Timothy read, thank you, Timothy, speaks of prophets and saints who longed for a better country and who had faith that led them to look beyond their present circumstances, and they envisioned a world shaped not by human injustice, but by divine promise. And as 2S LGBTQ+ people of faith, we understand this longing. We have often faced rejection, misunderstanding, or exclusion from communities that should have reflected God's love. And yet, like those who walked in faith before us, we hold on to the vision of a better world, a world where we are fully known and fully loved. Those ancient people had a faith that led them to follow God's calling, a faith that kept them going on long journeys, faith that gave them the strength to carry on when all seemed lost. And honestly, some days I look at the headlines, I doom scroll way too much, and I look at the present circumstances we find ourselves in, and it is sometimes hard not to despair, hard not to be discouraged. And sometimes I think we are currently living out the most difficult section of some poor high schooler's 2060 history exam. Hate seems so strong, so we need to proclaim love and justice louder than ever. Amen? Because a better world doesn't just happen when we wish for it. It's not just waited for or hoped for. It has to be worked for. It is actively built through justice and compassion. And the prophets and saints who